Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I'm here for my LPL Spring Playoffs Semifinals overview and analysis video. We are here. The final 3 teams are left in the LPL. We know one of the teams that is going to be in the finals, that is going to be going to MSI, that being Bilibili Gaming, but who will be joining them? Today, we cover the semifinals, the 2 and the 3 seed going up against each other. The winner, obviously, moving on to the finals, moving on to MSI. The loser will officially have their spring split done, and they will not be going international, at least until they have the opportunity to qualify for Worlds. And so a lot on the line for both of these teams. I'm excited for this series. I hope you guys are as well. If you are, let me know down in the comment section below. Who did you think was going to win this series? Where did you think it was going to go? Did it go as you expected? Would love to know your thoughts and opinions on everything that happened in these games down below. Of course, if you want to know my thoughts, you can check out the video up in the iCard right now. That's going to be my video on the previous round. That's winners finals, you know, round number 5, whatever you want to classify it as. And at the end of that video, we of course previewed this series. I gave my full in-depth analysis on a lane-by-lane breakdown. If you want an in-depth kind of overview of what I expect to happen in this series, you can check that video out. Of course, also up there is going to be the LPL playlist. That's going to be every single week of the regular season, covered, reviewed, given an overview over the course of this entire year so far, and that also includes every single playoff round as well. So if you're interested in that, check it out. But today, we are going to be going over the semifinals, the lower bracket finals, whatever you really want to call it, whatever nomenclature you want to give it. And if you are new here, what we do on the channel is go game by game, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team is able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the game and a dud of the game for each individual game. And at the end of the series, I will be giving a series MVP, player of the series, if you will, to kind of tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. Of course, we will also preview our LPL finals at the end of the video, just as a nice overview, but most of today is going to be talking about the semifinals, and some might argue that this is, you know, just as important of a series as the finals are, because this is a qualification series for MSI, and that's super important for both of these teams. Let's not delay too much longer. Let's jump right into the analysis. I don't want to waste you guys' time too much. Of course, it is a matchup between the number 2 seeded Top Esports and the number 3 seeded JD Gaming. These teams have faced off against each other in the playoffs already earlier on in round number 4. Of course, Top Esports first series, and that was a dominating sweep in favor of Top Esports. They go up to the winners bracket. They're not able to get over the hump that is Bilibili Gaming, but it was a very competitive series, and TES right now looks the best they've looked all year long, in my opinion. They have pretty clearly been the number 3 team. I would say throughout the regular season, it always felt like Bilibili and JD Gaming were 1A, 1B, or Bilibili kind of separating themselves at the end of the year, but Top Esports really making that late season push. They got pretty lucky in terms of how things ended up with JDG kind of not playing as well down the stretch in the regular season, dropping an extra series so they could grab that 2 seed, so they could be in the double elimination stage already, but they had to prove it, beating JD Gaming, that they deserved that number 2 seed, and that's exactly what they did. They proved that in that series against JDG, where quite frankly, they just outplayed them. They manhandled them. It was not particularly close, and I know JDG is going to be looking for kind of a revenge series here, if you will, against TES. Now, both of these teams, I think, very much expect to win this. I would be highly surprised if either of them came in here feeling like they were the underdogs in this series. TES, obviously, because they already took the series against JDG, and they went to 5 and looked very competitive against Bilibili Gaming, which is obviously another really big positive and a big cap, or a big feather in their cap, if you will. But for JDG, this is JD Gaming. This is a team with Kanavi and Ruler and Missing, and even Flandre and Yagao. These are players who expect to be on the top 2 team in the league, basically no matter what, and a lot of these players have consistently been top players in this league. Kanavi's been a top player, Ruler's been a top player. These kinds of guys don't miss MSI, they don't miss international events, and so it would be a bit of a disaster for them, I think, if they lost this. But same thing could be said about TES because of how good they've looked in the playoffs up until this point. So I think it's going to be an interesting series. As I said in my preview, there are certain lanes that I think stand out a bit more than others in one way or the other. I really value TES's top side of the map. 369, I think, is really going to be positive in that matchup against Flandre, who can be a bit hit or miss. His good games have been excellent in this playoff run, but his bad games have also been horrible, and we saw that in the series against TES, where quite frankly, he was just outclassed by 369. I think you could also make the argument that right now, Jackie Love and Mako are definitely the better performing bot lane, but it's ruler and missing. It would really only take 1 or 2 games for me to completely believe in them as the best bot lane in the world again. They just have not been that in the playoffs up until this point. They've been pretty stubborn in terms of the things they've been willing to draft, and honestly, they've been dragging JDG down a little bit. Not a huge amount, but at least a tiny bit. And then, you know, jungle mid, I think that's where you start to look at JDG potentially getting their advantages. Tion can be rather inconsistent, and Kanavi has been the best jungler in the world over the past 2 years, and, you know, for as much shit as I give Yagao, Cream is just not as experienced at this level. You would have to imagine that Yagao should be able to at least take advantage of some of the positioning mistakes that Cream is inevitably going to make as an aggressive player, but I do think this is going to be a fun series no matter what. And I'm really intrigued to see who ends up coming out on top. And of course, if we are going to see who comes out on top, that means we get to go game by game. And that means starting with game number 1. And the winner of game number 1 was Top Esports. They are going to take the first game of this series. They're going to go up 1-0, establishing pressure very early on here. And this is exactly what you want to see from TES. You've already shown that you can beat JDG. There's been some doubt in JDG's mind. They were a little bit more up and down against a team like Ninjas in Pajamas. They've not exactly been as dominant in this playoff run as maybe you would anticipate. Maybe there is a bit of doubt and confusion in terms of their play style. While coming out in game number 1 and pretty definitively being the better team in this game, that's just going to add to that, you know, doubt and lack of confidence that I think JDG has been running with for the playoffs. And quite frankly, it's going to give you a lot of that confidence that you have been carrying through, the momentum that you carried through even that series with Bilibili Gaming. And so I think this is a really big win for TES, and I think this is actually something that is going to really swing the series in their favor, because this was a pretty dominant game from them. For JDG on the other side, unfortunately, you picked a lot of comfort and you still lost, which is certainly a bit concerning. You got things like the Taliyah, like the Zeri. These have been really heavy picks for this team over the course of this year, but it doesn't really matter if you're not able to outplay your opponents. If you fall behind in the mid game, then, you know, it's just gonna spiral out of control. You're gonna get snowballed on. This is a meta where you do want to try to get as much momentum as possible. You want to try to control the map and control objectives as quickly as possible into the game, and so this is really not an ideal way for JDG to start this series. I think some of the underperformances have definitely carried through to game number 1 here. Whether or not that will continue to be the case as we go throughout this series, I guess we will see. But let's talk about the positives for TES. First player of the game in game 1 is going to go to 369. Talked about this in the preview, not only obviously in this video, but in the previous video and in round number 4. 369 is just amazing. There's really only one top laner in the entire league that I think can go toe-to-toe with him in terms of performances, that being Bin for Bilibili Gaming. Flandre, as good as he has been at times, is pretty volatile. He is somebody who is going to have very good performances and very bad performances. It's always been, you know, kind of a bit of a concern for this JDG team, going from somebody who is stable like 369, and even Sheer to an extent, who is more stable than Flandre, to somebody who might have higher highs than both of those players, but also definitely has lower lows. Where is that going to land? Well, 369 pulling out the Urgot. That is obviously very funny to see him play at such a high level, but he dominated. He was excellent in this game. Truly just outplayed Flandre. Truly was able to generate a pretty big lead in the early game, and Urgot's a really difficult champion to deal with in the later half of the game. I'm not going to say this is one of the best top laners in the entire game right now, but we've seen Urgot in the past really succeed at the pro level, and it's because he does a little bit of everything. He is kind of a jack-of-all-trades champion, and I don't necessarily think he gets a lot of credit for that. He can carry the game in terms of damage. He can certainly be a very valuable secondary damage dealer for teams that have an Azir or a Lucian, while also offering a lot of other tools as well. He can be a pseudo frontliner because his build typically does index at least a little bit into, you know, frontlining stats, tankiness, and general survivability, which I think is always, of course, a positive for a pseudo melee champion. And then he can split push super well if you want to try and pull the map apart 1-1-3 or even 4-1 in a lot of these late game scenarios. Try to, you know, create situations where the Taliyah's big macro advantage isn't nearly as relevant. Urgot can do that at a high level in that same vein, and so I understand why this champion is more prioritized at the pro level, and I think he's fine enough right now to be able to pilot, and especially when you give him to someone like 369, who can really just win the game automatically if he starts getting ahead because he is that good. It really just goes to show what the champion can do. So credit to 369, awesome game from him. He continues to just kind of dominate Flandre in the 1v1 matchup. This happened last series as well. It's just not been a very good time for Flandre having to play into 369, perhaps trying to get some revenge against his former team here that let him go in the offseason, but everybody Everybody else here was also very good. I want to give a big shout out to Mako, who I thought played really well on the Nami, was constantly in right positions, and I think really on that champion, that's your big goal, is just being in the right place at the right time, using your abilities at the right time. There's not a ton of quote-unquote skill expression when it comes to what Nami can do different than other enchanters, but, you know, hitting bubbles I think is pretty crucial, and also just generally making sure that you are focusing priority targets in terms of who you are buffing in team fights. Generally, that is just what you should be doing, and Mako was good on that. Cream went deathless in this game. That's always a good sign that TES is doing well, and I thought Tion's engages were actually really solid in the back half of this game on the Sejuani. Overall, things just kind of working out for Top Esports. This was a generally very good game for them overall. Kind of a team effort, but that Urgot really did stand out in a positive way. And then for JDG on the other side, again, they went to a lot of comfort in this draft, and that should be something that I praise here in game number 1, and I would praise it if they had actually played well and played like they had been on comfort picks, but a lot of weird mistakes, a lot of weird mispositions in this game. Dead of the game is pretty easily going to go to Kanavi. He's really someone that needs to step up. We were talking in the preamble about how it really is a lot on this jungle mid in terms of the form that this team is in right now. Their ability to get by a team like Ninjas in Pajamas was a lot of the time through Yagao and through Kanavi and being able to generate macro advantages through those two players. If they're not playing well, specifically if Kanavi is not having a good series, that's a death sentence for JDG. I really don't see a lot of other avenues for them to be able to win because he is their early game in terms of how they play around, you know, his jungle pathing and his aggression and his skirmishing power. If he is losing Prio to a Sejuani in a game like this where Urgot and Azir also have Prio in their lanes and you don't really have a lot of top lane pressure, and then you've got Zeri Lulu in the bot lane, so they're really not going to be able to help with any sort of skirmishing pressure, so your early game lead ends up going. If that continues to happen, that is a disaster for JDG, and this is a really bad example of, I think, what it could look like if this team just completely loses its form. That being said, there were also other problems. Flandre was just kind of useless on the Rek'Sai. A lot of people talk about this champion like she's the strongest thing in the entire universe. She is very, very beatable. You know, she is a strong early game champion, and maybe she does have more late game utility than I give her credit for, but she's still not this kind of champion that can 1v9 the game towards the back half. You really need a lot to go right, and Flandre certainly played worse than his opponent in this matchup, which caused him to lose it. Ruler and Missing still are just mispositioned in some critical moments. Obviously, there were a lot more resources dumped into the Zeri this game. I'm not going to blame Ruler and Missing for this one, but maybe old Ruler and Missing would have pulled something back here in the mid game. They just didn't really have the ability to, and quite frankly, they're just not playing as well as they have at any point as a duo before this. Yagao was generally fine on the Taliyah, but that champion does so much for free, essentially, that you need more than just okay out of him. This was not a good game number 1 from JDG. Top Esports was dominant in this one, and they took a commanding lead. If they go up 2-0 in this series, that is disaster for JDG. So this has become a pretty must-win game, I would say, overall for JDG, to not let their confidence dip way too far below. But if TES can get that 2-0 lead, they're going to be in an amazing spot. So who's going to be able to take it? Well, the winner of game number 2 was JD Gaming. They are going to take game number 2. They're going to even up the series at 1 apiece, and man, did they desperately need this win. This was not a walk in the park game at all for them. Honestly, at both times, one of these teams tried to throw the game away, I'll say. It was a comeback from a comeback, if you will, but JDG ends up outlasting Top Esports. They end up making it all right in the end. They get the all-important Baron, and the game ends up going in their favor because they did have the better hyper carry. Really kind of an interesting way for things to have gone, but you can't really take a ton away from Top Esports. I think generally when you're looking at this game, if JDG had lost it, if they had had the lead that they had in the early game, thrown it away, and never, you know, gotten it back, never recovered in the way that they did, I think this series could have been just over on the spot. Like, I don't know if you, recover from that mentally. I don't know if there is an easier way to come back from that than just being like, okay, well, we don't have it. We don't have it. You know, we're in our own heads. Top Esports is clearly in ours as well, and we're just not coming back from it. So thankfully for JDG, they make things interesting by winning this game number 2. But again, credit to TES. They did a couple of really interesting things in the mid to late game that really kept them in this. And honestly, quite frankly, they should have won this game. But JDG also should have won this game before TES should have won this game. So a lot to talk about. Player of the game for me in game 2 is pretty obviously going to go to Yagao. If you would have told me before the playoffs started that Yagao was clearly going to be the best player on JD Gaming going into the playoffs, I would have actually been pretty pretty excited about that because he had been a player that I've been waiting to see kind of re-break out for this team. You know, Kanavi and Yagao as a duo really dominated 2022, and obviously they went their separate ways last year. They come back together. They want to play together again in 2024, and things haven't exactly worked out in the way that you would want. Kanavi has still been excellent. He was the runner-up to my MVP award, obviously, here in the LPL, but Yagao has never really felt like the guy he was when he was on JDG last, before he left for Bilibili Gaming. He even struggled a bit on BLG, I would say, in the regular season more than people remember because that team did so well internationally, but unfortunately, it's just not as simple as Yagao is doing well, that means JDG is doing well, like I would have hoped in the regular season. It's more so Yagao is doing really well and he's the best player on the team because everybody else has kind of taken a step back, and I don't want to rag too much on Kanavi in particular in this game because I actually think he was relatively okay on the Lee Sin, especially in the mid game. There were a couple of fights where I thought his kicks were really influential, but the bot lane's just kind of been there. They really have not been good enough, especially in terms of their early lane prio, and Flandre really wasn't great in this game. Yagao is being relied upon to be the primary carry for this team, which is not why you brought him back, but it's lucky that he is stepping up to the plate. For Top Esports on the other side, again, you're a little bit frustrated because you should have had the quote-unquote scaling. Neither team really indexed all that much into the late game here. Xin Zhao versus Lee Sin, that's a bit more of a skirmisher matchup. Kalista and Leona versus Varus Nico. Like, JDG does have theoretical better tools in the back half of this game, almost all stemming from Nico Ultimate, just kind of setting up everything else and potential Varus ult, you know, kind of ricocheting off to a couple of people, but it really was going to be about the mid lane hyper carries going toe-to-toe, and Yagao was just straight up better on the Azir. He played a more impactful champion, which I will get into, and he played it better, and that's what's going to cause this team to win. You can definitely look at a couple of different factors, but to me, that was by far the most apparent. Kanavi was also very good in some of these fights. The champion that he's playing isn't necessarily designed to be winning these 30-minute skirmishes around major objectives, but he can play them at a super high level. He's obviously just so comfortable on Lee Sin. Like, that's what it boils down to, is just the control that he has on that champion, his ability to make plays and, you know, generate resources on that champion that other players just wouldn't be able to do in situations like that. This was a good game from Kanavi. I think Missing also had a couple of really big plays on the Nico, but Ruler, Flandre just kind of along for the ride, and that just continues a trend that I think is at least a bit concerning. They really should have lost this game. They didn't have a very good mid game and generally lost a lot of pressure in that stage, mostly because they didn't have an easy way to deal with, like, Urgot, Kalista, even Xin Zhao, like Leona. They didn't have an easy way to, you know, control a lot of these kind of separated skirmishes, and I think they struggled because of that. Lucky for them, they were able to overcome it in the end. But for TES, dud of the game is going to go to Cream in the mid lane. I'm going to say it again. I've said it a bunch on this channel, and I'm sure if you watch all my videos, you're probably frustrated hearing me say it by this point, but Corki is just not a very good pick right now in the meta. He is just not all that reliable. I don't understand why teams are prioritizing this champion so much. Like, I get it. You look at the damage charts after this game, and you can see, oh, you know, Corki did most damage in the game. Oh, he was so useful. Oh, the team folded around him. But then you go and watch these team fights, and you're like, all of the damage is poke. All of it is completely negligible. On the front line of JDG, he has no actual way to deal relevant damage in a fight, especially in comparison to something like Azir, and he has even less pressure than a lot of these other hyper carries in the mid game, in the early game skirmishes. He's not Azir, who at least has lane priority in times in certain matchups. He's not Veigar, who can catch out roamers and be in the right place at the right time. He really is the definition of, well, we'll wait until we can just be this big artillery mage, and the champion just doesn't really do all that much in that situation anyways. I really do think if you have the Azir and if JDG has the Corki, I think you win this game super easily. I really do think this is a champ difference, and maybe I'm, you know, fighting a little bit too hard on the anti-Corki train, but I just don't think this champion is very good. Unfortunately for TES, a lot of their gold ended up going on Kalista, which is just not really a great, consistent way to be able to win fights. In the late game, JackeyLove and Mako, I think, played really well. Not a huge fan of the Leona. You know, obviously there are better engagers coming out of the support position, but when things like Nautilus are banned, I can understand moving to Leona. I don't think it's that much different than something like Thresh right now, which a lot of people are playing, but generally I still think it is a rung below like the best engagers, and I think we kind of saw that in the back half of the game. Also worth noting that, you know, Xin Zhao, Kalista as a dynamic duo in terms of your aggression, it is just going to be less valuable in the late game, and so you hit a point where you're just not able to fight nearly as easily. But again, you probably should have walked away from game number 2 with a win. Instead, it's 1-1. You're going into a best of 3. This is the first time you've lost to JD Gaming in this playoff run. You have to be able to turn this around quickly if you are TES. You don't want this spiraling out of control. And for JDG, this gives you another sliver of hope. TES has opened the door. You have to continue to push your way in. If you can win game 3, all of a sudden, all of those thoughts, they completely flip because now you're 1 game away from heading to the finals. So a very pivotal game number 3, probably the most pivotal game in the entire series. Who's going to be able to take it? Well, the winner of game number 3 was Top Esports. They are going to take game number 3. They are going to reassert themselves up 2-1 in this series, and this is getting a little bit concerning if you are a JD Gaming fan, because Top Esports has basically proven every step of the way that they are a team that, at the very worst, is able to match what you are able to put out in terms of pressure, and at their very best is completely outclassing JD Gaming right now. We saw that in the previous series that these two teams played. We saw that in their competitiveness against Bilibili Gaming, and here we are, 1 game away for them from qualifying for MSI, from qualifying for the LPL Finals, from knocking out JD Gaming. This was a dominant game number 3 win. We're talking about games 1 and 3 being very convincing in favor of TES, and JDG barely squeaking out a game 2 win. This is not looking good for them, but it is looking very good for Top Esports, who just continue to keep their foot on the gas. A very aggressive Team Comp 1 that has worked really well throughout the LPL playoffs, obviously with a little changes here and there, some aggression in some spots that you haven't seen it out of other teams, but for the most part, this is a pretty familiar team comp and draft for them. It's the Sedge plus Tristana combo. We've seen this a lot with Maokai. Maokai often banned, so Sedge kind of is the default other option in terms of taking Maokai's spot, but it's the, scaling jungler that can control objectives at a really high level, set up plays for their aggressive laners, and Tristana in the mid lane, who just has infinite pressure, especially in comparison to basically everything else that is considered meta, like your Talias, your Azirs, your Corkis. Like, they're just not going to be able to keep up with Tristana in the early game. And so you get this ability to skirmish, you get this ability to actually take a lot of these early fights while not missing out on the ability to control objectives in the mid to late game and make your life a lot easier in the team fighting stage. It's something that has been ridiculously successful over this LPL playoff run, not only for Top Esports, but for every single team that has ended up relying on it. Obviously, a couple of changes to it. The Rumble support is a little bit more aggressive than you would typically see with a draft like this, but you can get away with it when Mako is as good as he is. It really allowed JackeyLove to be a bit more aggressive. Sometimes he got punished for that aggression. He was the one part of the team that was probably focused a bit more, but even that aggression ended up being positive in favor of Top Esports because JackeyLove was pulling so much attention to the bot lane that it allowed 369 to really just obliterate every single fight that he was in. He's going to get player of the game in this one. The Renekton was super valuable, and quite frankly, he is just outclassing Flandre. They were fighting constantly up in the top side. You can see that not only from the damage charts, but go watch this game. The first 10 minutes, like the entire broadcast is focused almost exclusively on the top side of the map because 369 and Flandre are just never not trying to trade with each other. But 369 came out on top in basically every single one of those exchanges. When Ornn is not allowed to scale into the late game, Renekton is going to be able to just outduel him super easily, and Renekton's one of those champions that gets a bad rep for scaling poorly. Like, I agree that he's not the best scaling champion in the entire universe, but this, Renekton from ahead can do a lot in the mid game. He can really kind of get the game out of control a lot quicker than maybe you would anticipate, and 369 right now is just the best top laner. There really aren't top laners that are able to go toe-to-toe with him. This was another example of that. Tian and Cream, like I said, were also excellent in this one. Tian in particular, just very much a controlling jungle style. When you're playing into Vi, I talk about this all the time on the channel as well, you want to try and stop her from being able to snowball, because Vi in the late game, you press ult on a target, you just go in and you die. And so when you can take away the options for what the Vi wants to do in the early game to try and get herself and her laner some gold to allow her to be relevant in the late game, that's huge, because you are naturally just going to be more valuable on the Sejuani than her. So very good stuff from Tian. Cream was also significantly better here on Tristana than he was on the Corki. This just fits his style so much more. I don't want to see any more Corki from Top Esports. Hell, I really, if I had my own preference, I would not see Corki anywhere. I don't think this champion is good right now, but Tristana in particular for Top Esports is just so much better. So overall, topside masterclass from TES. 369 just continues to absolutely obliterate, but this was a dominating game. It wasn't just one player. It was everybody really stepping up. And then for JDG on the other side, they just don't feel like they are in it right now. When you're trying to compare this team to anything that they have done in previous years, it's hard to compare them because all of these players, I think, are playing worse right now in the playoffs in these pivotal moments than they have at any point this year and at any point last year, which is really upsetting to say. Dud of the game really fluctuated for me. I'm going to give it to Kanavi because having a 0% kill participation as the jungler on Vi and just having no prio, no pressure, not even attempting to try and make plays in the early game, it's just disappointing. Like, there really is no other word for it. It's just sad to watch. Like, Kanavi just is not playing well. He is getting completely out-jungled by Tion and completely out-macroed in the early game by Top Esports just in general, and that's Kanavi's biggest strength as a player. To see it just kind of fall to the wayside, it's certainly not an ideal thing to see, but Flandre also just got absolutely brutalized in the top lane matchup. Again, all he was doing was trying to trade, trying to stay alive, but Flandre's aggressive tendencies very much came back to bite him in this game because he just needed to play safe. He just needed to not allow 369 to get as far ahead and as going as he did. I think a lot of those trades, a lot of that aggression that Flandre just naturally shows on a lot of these champions ended up really coming back to bite him and his team as the game continued to go along. Taliyah also looked useless, which is a hard thing to do in this meta, but if there's any champion that can out-prio Taliyah in the early game, it's absolutely Tristana. And Ruler and Missing tried, like, they weren't the problem in this game. Again, a lot of attention going towards the bot side of the map for JDG. It just wasn't enough to actually make things interesting. Just a bad game from JDG, and now you are one game away. You are on the edge of being eliminated from the LPL playoffs, from not making MSI, which would be a bit of a disaster for this team. I think they locked themselves in for this at the beginning of the year, and especially because, you know, that trade, the trade of mid laners between Yagao and Knight over to Bilibili Gaming has been so successful for BLG. It's made them clear cut the best team in the league with no other changes. For you to sit here and be on the brink of elimination, it's definitely going to be something on your mind, and Top Esports on the other side of that coin definitely want to end this in 4. They do not want to go to a game number 5. Anything can happen in a game number 5, no matter the kind of momentum and, you know, power that I think they and the enemy team have played with throughout this series. They want to end this as quickly as possible. So are they going to be able to end it in game number 4? Are they going to punch their ticket to MSI after really working hard to get here? Or is JDG going to save their series in game 4 and push us to a Silver Scrapes game 5? Well, the winner of game number 4 was Top Esports. They are going to take game number 4. They are going to close out this series in 4 games, and they are heading to the LPL Finals for the first time in a little while. It's actually been a bit since Top Esports was a finals team. I believe it was summer of 2022. Of course, this team really underperformed last year. I think a lot of people had Worlds expectations at the bare minimum for TES. They weren't ever really able to get up to that, and that's honestly been a prevailing narrative, I think, for this organization for a while. Even when their teams are good, they tend to underperform or underachieve in some way, shape, or form. Even that good team in 2022 ended up not getting out of the group stage at Worlds, and so you've kind of gotten this narrative out of TES that when the lights are on brightest, they're just not able to step up, but here they are against JD Gaming, really playing well, and quite frankly, essentially 4-0ing them in this series. I know Game 2 was a little bit back and forth. I'm not going to try and sit here and say that they 1000% should have won Game 2. We've seen bigger comebacks, bigger leads get thrown by other teams, but I mean, you could make a really solid argument that this team played 7 games against JDG in the playoffs and were better in all 7, and that's a pretty crazy thing to say. For JD Gaming, the fact that the run ends here, the fact that this is going to be the final game that this team, this org, plays in the spring split, has got to be disappointing. I know that that's a big thing to put on this roster and on this team, but last year, I think a lot of people were talking about them as the best roster in the world. They had a super team at their disposal, and they just couldn't win Worlds with it. They got knocked out by T1 in the semifinals, a very competitive, very back-and-forth series, very likely were the second best team at that tournament, and so you can chalk that up. I mean, they won MSI. Like, they were the best team in the world for a lot of last year, and they went into this year with similar expectations. At the very least, I think they expected to be in the conversation for being the best team in the world. That has just not happened. They've gotten worse as the split has progressed. A lot of their problems are starting to get exploited by teams that are as talented as they are, but don't have the same kind of inconsistent issues, and unfortunately, they just don't have the pure raw mechanical talent to push themselves over the top anymore. This is a team with true flaws, and we will talk about that as we continue to go along. But player of the game here in game number 4 is going to go to JackeyLove on the Senna. I love watching JackeyLove play Senna. It really is a very fun experience. we all know the JackeyLove lore of the fact that he's just going to play super aggressive on whatever champion he is given. He's going to try and generate his own leads. He's not really going to care too much about whether or not you are in the right situation or not. He's going to create the right situation for himself. And honestly, on most champions, that can be both a positive and a negative. But on Senna, that's actually the kind of playstyle that I prefer and that I think gets you the most amount of advantages. And JackeyLove was excellent in this game. I think Senna Tahm Kench has been very positive for this team because Mako can actually play this more side lane you role in the back half of the game, which he's actually really good at. Like, he is very self-sustaining for a top-tier support player. It's kind of always been his MO. He can, kind of go on his own. He can leave JackeyLove on his own and he can survive. Senna is a very self-sufficient AD carry in that same vein as well, and so it just opens up a lot more options, I think, for how TES want to play the game. And JackeyLove is so good on Senna in these team fights that he's just able to take over and constantly become the most important player in the game. He was amazing here. And Mako was great too on the TK. When you have a deathless bot lane duo of Senna Tahm Kench, that's a pretty good sign that your game ended up going pretty well, especially after absorbing so much pressure. In game number 3, for them to bounce back on a pretty different style, Varus, Kalista, they've been the champions that have prevailed a lot in this series. To go to something like Senna, which does play quite a bit differently, and to succeed on it in that way, I think is really, really a big positive. Tian was also excellent in this series. I do want to point that out. He was better than Kanavi in basically every single game, maybe with the exception of game 2. Kanavi was pretty good in game 2, but 1, 3, 4, it's not even really up for debate in my opinion. Tian just outclassed Kanavi in this one, and that's really interesting to keep note of. It is just obviously something that Tian's got the upside to be able to compete with anybody. He's got the upside to have his best games be as good as anybody else's best games. And we saw that here. But for Kanavi to be the one to suffer at the hands of it, it's just a little bit surprising. But player of the series as a whole, this should not be surprising. It's going to go to 369 on the top side. He just is the best top laner in the LPL right now. And for my money, he is the best top laner in the world. I think he has proven that over the course of this year. I love Bin, and I think him and Bin are 1A, 1B. Zeus is kind of in that conversation, but we've seen what happens to him in big finals games. I think Keen is in that conversation. He's been pretty good this year, but to me, 369, I think, has the strongest argument right now to be the best top laner in the world, and he continued to prove that in this series. Flandre had been pretty hot going into this, and he just wasn't able to keep up with 369 at all. Flandre's only bad games, really, in the postseason were against 369. That should show you how good he has been. Even Kareem, who I think for a long time has been considered kind of the, I don't want to say the weak link of this team, but certainly the most unproven member of this team. He was excellent in this one on Ahri, his signature champion, and so really happy to see Top Esports just win across the board, and now it's going to be very interesting to see what this team can do internationally. This is really the first time that a couple of these players are going to get this opportunity in this circumstance. Mako going back to MSI for the first time since 2015, Kareem playing at his first international tournament, JackeyLove going back and really having the keys to the kingdom for the first time in a while. It's certainly a very interesting conversation to be had, but Top Esports has earned every step of the way there. And then for JD Gaming, again, you just have to be a bit disappointed with the outcome here. I think you probably wanted to at least be a bit more competitive in this series. Maybe you understand that Top Esports is just a really good team, one of the best in the world, and that you might not be able to beat them. But to kind of go down pretty laughably easy, especially in the back half of the series, games 3 and 4 were not close really at all. It's just not ideal. And for it to be the players that underperformed, it really is unfortunate. Dud of the game and really dud of the series. I know I don't give that, but it's going to go to Kanavi. He just played horrible across this entire series. And we talked about it. He was their win condition. He has been their win condition all year long, especially since Ruler and Missing have gone in this little slump that they've been on over the past month or so. Kanavi has been so integral towards what this team wants to do, and he just, quite frankly, wasn't good enough. He wasn't acting and playing like the best jungler in the world across this playoff run, and it cost them. It cost them pretty big, and Flandre was also just not good enough. Again, it's hard to really blame Flandre. He's an aggressive player who's going to take these matchups, and 369, quite frankly, is just better than him, and so when you get this aggressive player going against somebody who can outskill him, it's not going to look particularly good, but you have to know when to take your foot off the gas, and it hurt JD Gaming in this series. Yagao was pretty bad down the stretch. Ruler and Missing, while they weren't the biggest problem in this series, last year they would have been the solutions. They would have fixed a lot of the issues here because they would have won isolated in the Kalista Ashe lane. They would have been able to generate a massive lead, and they would have been really aggressive in the mid game at trying to get these skirmishes and objectives in favor of JDG, but that's just not who these two have been across the last month especially. There are real issues with JD Gaming, and they're going to cost them an international performance. I think this team more than expected themselves to get to MSI going into this split. You saw the emotion on these players' faces after they lost. Hopefully, they can use this loss as fuel to the fire to get them back in the summer split, because right now, quite frankly, they are just not where they want to be. And then for Top Esports, again, congratulations. You really can't say anything negative about this win. They have been excellent throughout the playoffs. They have given themselves a date with Destiny in the finals against Bilibili that we will preview in just a second, a chance for their revenge. And quite frankly, I do think they're going to have a chance. This team is as talented as they should be, and honestly, they've overperformed in a lot of aspects. The notion of this team underachieving, I think, has to be gotten rid of with this group of 5, because right now, they are one of the best teams in the world. But now that we have gone over the 4 games that happened in the semifinals, it's time to quickly preview the LPL finals. We know the 2 teams that are going to be in it, that are going to be representing the LPL at MSI this year, but who will be going as the #1 seed and as the LPL champion, and who will be going through the play-in stage. Of course, it is a matchup between the #1 seeded Bilibili Gaming and the #2 seeded Top Esports. Top 2 seeds heading into the playoffs, facing off against each other in the finals. This is a bit of an upset. You know, people had JD Gaming as the second best team in the LPL going into the playoffs, and so for TES to pretty convincingly beat them and get here, I think does give you a lot of confidence that this team deserves to be here. They didn't beat them once, they beat them twice, and they went toe-to-toe with BLG when these 2 teams faced off in the winners finals. But that's exactly why I'm not going to spend too long talking about this preview, if you will, because we already saw this series. Not only can you watch the games that have already happened and kind of get an idea of where these 2 teams match up against each other from those. You can check out, obviously, my winners finals video up in the iCard, but also you can check out my round 4 video where I do this exact thing. I preview a matchup between these 2 teams. I go lane by lane and talk about where I see the advantages and the disadvantages. One thing I said in that matchup was that 4 or so out of the 5 lane matchups I see as pretty even, basically pushes. Top lane, I mean, Bin and 369 might be the 2 best top laners in the world right now, and so how can you really say one is definitively better than the other? Jun versus Tian, both are excellent players, and especially with Tian in form right now, it's really hard for me to say that one is better than the other. Elkanon versus Jackie Love and Mako, you have the 2 best bot lanes in the LPL going toe-to-toe, and they were both very relevant in that previous series. How can I definitively say that one is better than the other? The one lane that I pointed out in my previous analysis that I said was a little bit in favor of one team, which is why I favored them, was the mid lane. Knight, theoretically on paper, should just be a better player than Cream, and I certainly would expect that to continue. I'm not saying Cream has been bad at all. In fact, he has exceeded my expectations for him over the course of this year. He was really the first channel darling on this channel back in 2021, and so it's pretty funny for me to say, to kind of be a little bit lower on him, I would say, than public consensus, but I do think he is a player that can be exploited. He has tendencies that are a little bit more exploitable. He's gotten rid of a bunch of them, I would say, or at least a bit of them over the course of this year, which is definitely a positive, but it hasn't been perfect for him. It's just been good. So if Knight is still the best player on the Rift, BLG are probably going to win this series, but Jackie Love and Mako were excellent the last time these 2 teams played. 369 is on an absolute tear right now. He is on fire, and you could really expect him to step up and be a menace. Tian might be the better jungler of these 2 in the current form that he is in. Like, there are real conversations to be had, which is why, as you can see from the percentile graph in the middle, if you compare this to the one that I had in the previous time they played when I was previewing this, I actually trust TES a little bit more now. I give them more of a shot to win this series after what they showed against JDG and BLG in the playoffs up until this point, but BLG simply have to be the favorites. If they don't win the LPL, they are going to feel disappointed. Top Esports have already overcome themselves kind of being an underdog against JDG before. I expect that they are more than happy to do so again, but Bilibili does seem like they are on a different level from everybody right now, and so, quite frankly, I'm just excited to see where this series ends up going. I think both have become worthy of being LPL champions, and it's really going to be about who's better on the day. Alright, but that is going to do it for my LPL semifinals overview and analysis video here in the spring playoffs. Only 2 remain. Bilibili Gaming, Top Esports, the 2 teams representing the LPL at MSI this year. The 2 teams competing in the LPL finals. Only one of them will be crowned the champion of the LPL spring split. Who do you guys think it's going to be? Down in the comments section below. Let me know. I would love to know your thoughts and opinions on everything. What did you think of the TES JDG series? Are you surprised that TES was able to overcome JDG, quite frankly, so confidently? Or did you expect this team to be able to overcome them, especially after what happened in in round number 4. Would love to know your thoughts on that, of course. Let me know what you think is going to happen in the finals, and let me know how you feel about these two teams representing the LPL at MSI. For the first time ever, MSI will feature 10 Chinese players representing 2 Chinese teams. All 5 of the players on both of these teams are Chinese. They no imports for the LPL this year, which is a really big accomplishment for them. It shows the growth and development that this region has had over the last couple of years, and they really both are forces to be reckoned with. You could make a strong argument they are both the best teams in the world right now, and so I'm really interested. But if you guys did enjoy the video, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. You know, all the other regions are done, so we kind of do only post about the LPL, at least right now, but we've got a back catalog of everything that's happened in the LCS, the LEC, the LCK over the course of this year, and of course the LPL finals are right around the corner, as well as MSI. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when the coverage of those videos ends up going live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. Hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all